This is the Honda NSX, and I think it's one of the most interesting cars ever made. Back in the late 80s, Honda was known for making two things: sensible, slightly boring family cars, and spectacular Formula 1 engines. And then one day in 1990, Honda was like, hey, maybe we should make something in between those two things. And the NSX was born. Aimed squarely at the mid-engine V8 Ferrari of the day, the 348, the NSX had a 3-litre naturally aspirated V6 engine with VTEC. Power was only 270 brake horsepower, but the all-aluminium NSX was light, so that was plenty. The car I have here is one of the very last examples, a 2005 model with 290 brake horsepower and a manual gearbox. It is absolutely beautiful, totally iconic, and it also happens to be one of the most important supercars ever made. Here's why.
Picture the scene. The year is 1989 and you are a wealthy business person looking for a new supercar. What do you get? There were plenty of good choices back there. You could have had a Countach, a Pantera, a F40, a Testarossa, a 348. I mean, there were lots of good supercars in the 80s, but they all had one very bad thing in common. They were good at being supercars, but when it came to just being cars, they were hopeless. I mean, take the Countach, one of the most spectacular looking, incredible sounding cars ever made. Brilliant for turning heads in Monte Carlo, amazing for standing next to in photos. But can you imagine parallel parking a Countach? Can you imagine doing your food shop in one, or going on any kind of long drive in it? It would have been hell. See, back then supercars weren't expected to be usable or practical. All they had to do was go fast and look good while they were doing it. If you'd have gone up to Enzo Ferrari in the 80s and complained that the aircon on your Testarossa was a bit weak or you couldn't see out the back very well, he would have slapped you across the face and told you to grow up. And then in 1990, the NSX happened, and it changed everything. Because suddenly here was a supercar that was comfortable, a supercar with a big boot, a supercar that was reliable. It was unheard of. And because the Honda NSX was so usable, the people who bought them actually used them. They put serious miles on these things, and people realized they actually quite liked owning supercars that they got to drive more than once a year. And they began to hold other supercars to those same standards. This little Honda sent all of the hotshot supercar makers back to the drawing board, because it showed a supercar doesn't have to be massively compromised to still feel special, and it forced other brands to start considering things like practicality and usability when designing their supercars. This car is the reason that today in 2020 you can buy a comfortable Ferrari or a Lamborghini that doesn't try and kill you every 30 seconds.
So that is the NSX's place in history. An icon, no doubt, but what's it like to drive in 2020? Well, as you may have guessed if you've been listening to the story, really easy.
It's got light steering, it's got comfy suspension, it doesn't feel too wide or too low. There's nothing scary about it at all. And I'm very glad it's not too scary, because this particular NSX that I'm in is one of the best examples left anywhere in the world. It belongs to Honda, it's from their heritage fleet. It's done less than 45,000 miles, and I would guess it's probably worth about 150 grand. Oh. Even when you're driving the NSX slowly, there are three things that make you constantly aware you are in something special. Number one, the view out. It is spectacular. I've never seen anything quite like it. You know, in video games where you can change the camera so that it's like you're lying on the bonnet looking out? That's the view in the NSX. I feel like a hood ornament right now. Number two, this gearbox, this lovely snickety little gearbox. It might be my favorite gear shift I've ever experienced. It's between this and the Exige, I think. Number three, you sit so low in this car. I mean, so low, and that really gives you that supercar feeling. It's also a very good thing because there is absolutely no headroom in this car. I realize at 6'5", I'm not really a fair test of headroom, but trust me, it'd be snug in here. What's it like when you hurry it on a bit? Noisy, mostly. This engine sounds like nothing else once it comes alive. This 3-litre VTEC V6. It's like a big angry dog barking in your ear. years just seem to go on forever. This car will do 100 miles an hour in third gear. You get to like 5,500, 6,000 RPM, you think you're gonna run out of path, the VTEC kicks in, and there's another 2,000 howling RPMs left. And best of all, because it's a Honda, you can redline it all the time and it'll just take it. Now, I'll be honest, by modern standards, on paper at least, this is not an especially fast car. 0 to 60 miles an hour in about 5.7 seconds. Put it this way, a Golf R would have this thing on toast. But do you know what? I've driven a Golf R and this feels faster, because while the Golf is so calm and without drama in the way it accelerates, this is the exact opposite. It makes a very big song and dance of its performance. It's so fizzy and alive, and I'm sat so low down to the ground. The sense of speed is incredible. It's one of those cars that reminds you how little performance figures actually matter in the real world. Also, unrelated, it smells amazing in here. It smells of leather-bound books and rich mahogany. Don't get that in a Golf R. I'll tell you what this car reminds me of, and I'm a little bit afraid to say this because I don't want to hurt Honda's feelings. I mean this in the best possible way. It reminds me a bit of an MX-5 on steroids, because an MX-5 is the only other car I've driven that has this ability for making all driving feel special at all speeds. The only difference is that in an MX-5, that specialness comes from the chassis and the tactile experience, whereas in this, you get both of those, plus a spectacular engine.
Now, I've talked a lot in this video about how easy and friendly this car is, but I don't want to give the impression that this is some my first supercar, suitable only for people with zero talent. Yes, it handles brilliantly, and you've got lots of grip, supple suspension, traction control, and an LSD all watching your back, but it still feels very unassisted compared to modern stuff, and it still commands your respect. I have a feeling that this is one of those cars that's easy to learn, but difficult to master, and I'm sure that drivers 100 times as skilled as me would find it just as rewarding to drive.
Speaking of people 100 times better than me at driving, this is probably the part of the video where we do the obligatory Cena mention, because as I'm sure you're aware, the great man played a part in the development of this car. And if you haven't seen the video of Ayrton Senna screaming around Suzuka in an early NSX, pause this video right now, stop watching my dumb face and go and watch that first, because it's probably the coolest thing ever recorded on camera. Oh, here's another good NSX name drop I heard recently. Apparently Gordon Murray, you know, Mr. McLaren F1, loves this car. Apparently he drove one of these to work every day when he was working on the F1, and the usability of the NSX heavily inspired what the McLaren F1 ended up being. If anyone at home has a McLaren F1, I'd be very happy to film with one and fact check that. Right, let's talk about the things I don't like so much about the NSX, and actually they're all in here. Number one, no headroom. I've mentioned this already and I realise it's kind of a me problem, but I don't know, I just figured the world's first usable supercar might have a bit of cabin space. Sadly not. I'd also hoped the world's first usable supercar would have a good bit of cabin storage and a cup holder, but alas no. This is the smallest storage space I've ever seen in any car ever. What am I supposed to keep in there? A crisp £5 note? The cabin in general just feels a little bit dated. In a 1990s car, you could forgive it, but this is a 2005 model. And look at it, it's got a cassette player. What the hell is a cassette? But you know what? I don't care about any of that. I don't care that I don't fit in it. I want one of these. Not because it's a piece of history, not because it's beautiful, but because I love driving it.
These days there are lots of supercars that offer performance and practicality, but few strike the balance quite as sweetly as the original. And if you can afford to buy one, you should really buy one, because the value of these legendary cars is only going in one direction.
So there we have it, the NSX, the supercar that changed supercars forever. Make sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment down below and let me know what cars you'd like to see on the channel next, and we'll see you next time.